Council members hand Mayor Faulkner a huge defeat, shooting down a special election on the convention center expansion and Soccer City projects. Some El Cajon residents have learned that toxic gas from contaminated groundwater is seeping into their homes. And how much marijuana is too much to consume when you're driving? Turns out nobody's figured it out yet. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer, and joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today are KPBS Metro reporter Andrew Bowen. Hi, Andrew.
Hey, Mark.
And Eric Anderson, environment reporter for KPBS. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Mark.
Reporter Ingrid Lobet of iNewsSource. Hi, Ingrid.
Thanks for having me.
Glad you're here today. And KPBS health reporter Kenny Goldberg. Hi, Kenny.
Hi, Mark.
Glad to have you back. Well, it appears Mayor Kevin Faulkner's bid to fast-track a convention center expansion and the Soccer City development in Mission Valley has skidded to a halt. San Diego City Council members scuttled the mayor's plan for a special election this fall on the two proposals. That shoves public consideration of these huge projects and critical projects to next year's regularly scheduled election, or maybe the June primary. Andrew, the vote was close here. Tell us what council members specifically were considering this week.
Well, they only took one vote, as it turned out. They first heard a staff presentation and took some public testimony on the mayor's plan to expand the convention center by raising the hotel room tax. But they couldn't vote on that because they needed to call a special election first, and that failed 5-4. So they ultimately didn't vote on the special election, or on the mayor's convention center plan. They sent that back to city staffers.
Okay. And what were the arguments of the council members who blocked this special election bid?
Yeah, well, there were several. One of them, it was a party line vote, so the 5 Democrats voted against it. The 4 Republicans supported it. The Democrats basically said the mayor hadn't done his homework in building a coalition. I think the unspoken word there was labor. He didn't get labor unions on board with it. There were people saying that it was a big decision and that it should be voted on in the general election when we know that voter turnout is going to be higher. We heard that the city doesn't even have the land rights to develop this land where they're going to expand the convention center. And I think the most interesting argument I heard was that the mayor doesn't even care that much about the convention center expansion. He was really only aiming for this special election because of Soccer City, which I know we're going to talk about later.
Well, we'll get into a lot of moving parts here. We'll try to get as many as we can. We've got a couple of clips here, dueling arguments for and against the special election. First, we've got Republican Lori Zaff, followed by Democrat David Alvarez.
I've been waiting for years and years and years for this, and here it is. And the shovels are ready to go, the cranes are ready to go, the jobs are ready to go, and we're just kicking the can down the road and delaying this. And for me, it's very discouraging and sad that things have come to this.
This isn't ready to come forward. I mean, it just really isn't. Shovels can't be ready or cranes can't be ready because the land doesn't belong to the city. It's not in our ownership.
All right, again, that was all on the expansion of the convention center downtown, not the Soccer City development. What did some of the other council members argue?
Well, I mean, as we heard Councilmember Zapp was saying, this has been delayed and delayed and delayed. The city council, there was a tax increase that was passed by landowners downtown that got thrown out in court. I mean, this has gone through a lot of different legal battles. Yeah. It's been years, and every year that goes by, of course, with inflation, the cost of constructing it gets more expensive, and they say we're missing out on the opportunity costs of this extra business that the city could be bringing in but isn't because our convention center is too small.
And Mayor Faulkner, Eric, was making a lot of those same arguments. But the idea is, as Andrew was mentioning, there were a lot of obstacles to this that the city attorney had raised as well, right?
Well, there are a lot of questions that are being raised. It's kind of interesting that the convention center issue was defeated in part because it didn't have that support from unions. And I think that Soccer City sort of suffers that same problem. They've talked about this issue of engaging the unions in town to support their project. You don't really see that because they won't agree to a PLA, a project labor agreement, in advance. They say they're going to pay prevailing wage for the jobs that will be created when they build Soccer City, but they don't have that buy-in from the union. So they're relying primarily on the fan base to come forward and support their issue. I have a story coming out today that looks at the media campaign that's been involved. Soccer City folks have spent raised in the neighborhood of $2.5 million now. We've seen the ads for almost a month on television. The opponents, Fenton and Sudbury, two developers in Mission Valley, have put up $1.5 million of their money. They've begun running an ad, a boondoggle ad on television to get their message across. And they're all focused on, kind of comically, on influencing an election that hasn't even been set yet.
Right, it's amazing. Dueling ads for an election that isn't even going to happen this year.
What is the fan base for MLS soccer?
I think that what they're counting on is the people who are excited about the possibility of bringing soccer to San Diego. There is a history of support for soccer here. There's a chapter of the Outlaws, the San Diego Outlaws, the fan group that supports the men's national soccer team. So I think they have some fan support here that they're counting on. And I think it was evidenced by the fact that they had the signature campaign to put this issue in front of the city council. They collected 112,000 signatures about there, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 82,000 were deemed to be valid, which was enough to put it in front of the council.
And I imagine that a lot of people just want another sports team in San Diego since we lost our football team.
Yes, convenient time.
And that's a big thing. Kenny, I'm going to come to you in 1 second, but Andrew, Monday, tell us specifically, there is a vote on Soccer City Monday before the council.
Yeah, so the city council, because the Soccer City proponents gathered enough signatures, the city council has two options. They can either approve it outright or they can place it on an election on the ballot.
And again, it won't be a special election.
And as of now, of course, the city council still can change its mind.
Could revive that.
But based on the way that things stood on this last Monday, I don't see that happening anytime soon.
Big surprise. Kenny?
How legitimate is the argument that San Diego is losing business, a lot of money, because the convention center isn't of a ideal size?
Well, the city has done studies finding that an expanded convention center would actually bring in more business. The current convention center, the operators say that it's running at capacity, and that, quite often they have larger conventions that come to San Diego, take a look around and say, this just can't accommodate our needs, we need more space. So they say, anecdotally, and we certainly hear from the operators, that there's a lot of business that we have to say no to, or that, they have to turn us down because we're not big enough.
Well, it's not as if other people don't come here and spend money, or other businesses don't come here and spend money.
Yeah, and an interesting thing that I heard at the council meeting on Monday was that perhaps the greater reason why we can't accommodate enough of these conventions is the lack of hotel rooms, and that hotel rooms are too expensive. A woman got up during public comment and said, Comic-Con says that one of their biggest obstacles to getting people to come here to San Diego during Comic-Con is that every year the hotel room, the hotel operators jack up their prices during Comic-Con because there's such high demand. And a lot of these people who want to go to that convention are not millionaires. So what the city should instead be focusing on, she said, was building more hotel rooms and allowing for greater development so that more people can stay here.
Now, as far as Soccer City, the big plan in Mission Valley goes, there's some pretty organized opposition to that. I wanted to get to a bite from Nick Stone and what his take is on what his opponents are saying and what they want.
There's an active campaign that has been funded by developers that own properties not 300 yards from Qualcomm. There's opposition from other developers who would like to be able to develop the project. I mean, there's a lot of sort of developer-focused opposition out there, and what I think you're seeing is that all of those streams of opposition have all kind of revolved around the development community expressing a view with respect to this project, and that group is powerful.
All right, so that was Nick Stone, of course, is supporting the FS investors here who want to do the Soccer City project. Here's Laura Fink. She's the spokeswoman for the developers that he was referencing, Fenton and Sudbury.
We want to make sure that we get the right price for taxpayers. And to do that, you have to have a fair and open competition. We would welcome Soccer City to put in a bid and to compete in the open market. That is how taxpayers can make sure that they get the best value for their land.
All right, Eric, you think that might happen then? This opens up to more developers?
I think what you're really seeing here is you're starting to see the unveiling of who has interest in that property. We know that San Diego State University has an interest in that property, that they've expressed that publicly. We know that the developers, Fenton and Sudbury, in the Mission Valley area are interested in what happens in that property. Whether or not they're interested in developing it, that question remains out in the open. There are other developers in town that also have interest in that property. So the longer the story is in the public eye, I think the more we learn about who is interested in doing something with the Qualcomm Stadium property and kind of where their position is.
Now, we talked about labor. They want basically a set, higher floor on the wages and some sort of agreement there. But let's talk about the mayor for a second here. Mayor Faulkner, he tied himself to both these things going through in the special election to enable them. Is this a big swing and miss, an 0 for 2 for the mayor?
Yes. I think you could make that argument. I think that we still have to wait and see what happens here. I don't think I think the convention center proposal, that's in trouble. Big. It's probably on the shelf. That was a swing and a miss. But I don't think that the Soccer City prospect of redeveloping that Qualcomm site has been completely resolved. It hasn't worked in FS investors' favor to this point, but I don't get a sense from them that they're giving up, and they're going to be at the council on Monday. They're going to get support for their plan.
And I just want to add, I mean, I think that, what we saw from Faulkner during all of this was, he's trying his hand at strong-arm politics. This came out through the budget vote that the city council took away funding for the special election. He put it back in using his veto power, and then took away funding from districts that had opposed his ideas. And so, I can't tell you how many times I heard covering his re-election campaign, him saying it's not about Republican, Democrat, or Independent, it's about what's best for San Diego. Well, if Republicans and Democrats don't agree on what's best for San Diego, it really is about that party line, and that's what we saw in the city council vote.
All right, well, it'll be fascinating going forward, and obviously we've talked a lot on this show, and we will continuing to see as both these things play out in the future. We're going to move on now. It's been more than 20 years since state officials learned that toxic chemicals dumped by an aerospace manufacturer in El Cajon contaminated groundwater in that neighborhood. Yet environmental experts say testing for toxins at a nearby school and at mobile home parks has been woefully inadequate. Now we've learned that gas from the dangerous contaminants has been found in some nearby homes. Ingrid, start with this chemical. What caused the contamination? What is it?
It's a very common solvent. It's used for cleaning tools, cleaning machinery, degreasing. In fact, it's probably the most common chemical traditionally for that. And a lot of it has gone underground, in fact, for about 1.33 miles, which makes it one of the longest plumes in San Diego County for sure, and perhaps in the state of California.
Okay, and it's trichloroethylene.
Trichloroethylene, TCE.
Trichloroethylene. I know you can pronounce that better than me because you've been doing the stories.
Stick with TCE.
TCE. So what dangers specifically does TCE pose to people?
There's really quite a few. It causes reduced sperm count in men and reduced sex drive. It also can be responsible for, it's associated with low birth weight babies. And also if a woman is exposed in the first trimester of her pregnancy, there's a particular fetal heart defect that can develop as well.
Okay.
Also kidney cancer and liver cancer.
Okay, so it's nasty stuff. There's no question. Now, give us the history of this event. How long was ago was the contamination discovered? What was done at that point?
The records show that in 1987, I believe a county health inspector found this sump. Some people call it a collection tank. Some people call it a pit. That needed immediate action, and Amatec did take action at that time.
That was the company that owned that firm.
Yes, this was an aerospace manufacturing site, and it was Amatec's site at that time. And they removed the redwood boards and the concrete bottom of this pit and a bunch of soil that surrounded it. That was the beginning of the documentary record, you might say, the paper record.
Okay, so they tried to get rid of all this stuff that they hoped would clean up the site and make it...
and began to delineate it, began to measure how far had it gone, how wide was it, how concentrated was it in groundwater and in the soil.
All right. Now, it seems just logical that testing and protections were warranted at that time. It really wasn't done, though, right?
There was a lot of testing that was not done at that time. It was several years before people started testing the air in the school. Then a couple of years ago, a system to bring, because this is a chemical that doesn't really want to stay in a water form. It wants to become a vapor, and when it becomes a vapor, it comes up through the soil. And then if you're just out on the ground, it's okay, but if it builds up inside an enclosed space, perhaps like a classroom or a mobile home, that's when you get a problem. And so a couple of years ago, they started measuring the air levels in the classrooms and started routing vapor up from underneath the slabs over the roof so it wouldn't get in the classroom, but nobody looked at the mobile homes. And the plume very clearly does run under a very densely settled community of people in mobile homes.
So what is happening now regarding testing at these mobile home sites? And there was a development late this week, right?
Right. Well, only 17 homes have been tested already, and surprisingly, I think, for people who said, well, you don't have to worry about the mobile homes because the groundwater is pretty deep there. It's probably not making its way into the mobile homes. They're not on slabs. There was more than enough gas to be over the screening level in half of those 17. In 5 of those 17, there was enough that the EPA recommends you take some kind of action. And in 2, it was high enough that the EPA recommends you take immediate action. You either filter that air or you relocate those people or something like that.
Now, Eric, you cover the environment for KPBS. This seems pretty unusual. Don't you think that there was something affecting public safety like this, they'd get on the testing a lot sooner than this?
It seems like it would be a good thing for people to look into. Absolutely, it should.
Yeah. Now, the experts who have looked at this, how have they characterized this lack of testing and protections over the years now?
I think you have to separate the school and the mobile homes, so I'll just stick with the mobile homes for the moment, which were not tested until just 2017 was the first testing that happened there. And some people who have reviewed the numbers that were found in that very small sample of first homes have said, these are some very high readings. And just testing one time may not be adequate because it's been found that the levels of this contaminant can vary within a given day, can vary from season to season. So if you're a homeowner, you've had one test taken, you might not find that to be enough.
So how long would it take? Sorry, how long would it take for this to actually show up in someone's health if, in fact, the levels are high enough to actually do harm to somebody?
Cancer can take 20 years to develop. That's common. I don't know how long it takes to reduce sperm count. And of course, the fetal heart defect, we don't know exactly how long, but we're talking about 1 trimester of pregnancy.
Kenny?
Who dropped the ball on this whole thing?
There are 2 state agencies that have principally been involved. We have one that's primarily an underground water agency staffed by engineers. They told me they didn't expect to find anything in the homes. And then we also have an agency that's a little bit more involved with public health and above ground issues. That's the Department of Toxic Substances Control.
These are state agencies?
2 state agencies.
And what do they say now?
The Regional Water Quality Control Board said, well, we didn't expect to find it and we're doing testing now. And the Department of Toxic Substances Control, I asked them, they said, well, we weren't the lead agency.
Now, what recourse do residents have at this point?
They can demand further testing. The company has, Amatec, which is the legally responsible party, has said, we'll test. As of this week, you referenced a recent development this week, just the night before last, they said anyone who wants their home tested, they can get it tested. It might be worth noting that action by Amatec goes beyond what the state was saying. The state was saying, well, we'll just do a little bit of testing. If we find positive hits, we'll test a few more houses. That's the way we do things. The company said, you know what? Anyone who wants testing should tell us. We'll test their homes.
And are there lawsuits stemming from all of this?
There are an increasing number of lawsuits, and we haven't reported this yet, but the first wrongful death lawsuit was filed yesterday or the day before.
Okay, so more to come on that story. Well, thank you very much. Fascinating story out there. Well, a cop suspects you of driving drunk. He pulls you over, runs a field sobriety test, and ultimately tests your breath, blood, or urine for the level of booze in your system. But what if you're not drunk? What if you're stoned instead? Kenny, your series at KPBS this week, or last week actually, focused on the challenge facing law enforcement now that recreational pot's going to be legalized in California. What kind of test do they have if they pull you over and suspect you're stoned?
Well, there's no equivalent of a breathalyzer test for marijuana or any other drugs for that matter. So right now, if an officer suspects you of driving impaired, they pull you over, they try to do a quick assessment. And if they think you're stoned and not drunk, it's really based on a judgment call because, as I said, there's no field-based test. Now, what they do have in some agencies, some police agencies, is they're called drug recognition experts. These are police officers that get special training who learn how to recognize some of the telltale signs of intoxication of marijuana, of cocaine, of certain prescription drugs and the like, and they can do a better assessment, a more reliable one. But the bottom line is it's a judgment call.
Now, how and kind of an art more than science at this point? That's the problem.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, how big a problem is it now with drivers taking to the roads after consuming marijuana? What do accident analysis show, for example?
Well, the state Department of Public Health did a examination of deaths, of traffic deaths between, I think it's 2005 and 2014, and the #1 drug involved in these fatal crashes, besides alcohol, was marijuana. Now, that doesn't mean that marijuana was the cause of the crashes, and it doesn't mean that people were necessarily intoxicated under marijuana. But nonetheless, it's a very common element in a lot of these fatal crashes.
Okay. We have from your story, Deputy City Attorney Taylor Garrett talking to an audience about driving stoned, and those of you listening on radio, you can hear the audience is quite shocked by this. Here we go.
This is an actual marijuana DUI. So this car stops at the yellow and then red light. And then the Jeep comes barreling in there. So that was only marijuana. There was no other substances on board.
And what we saw there in that video was just a flat-out rear-ending of a guy who just apparently didn't see that car and went right through and blasted him. So the thing about marijuana is, as you alluded to a moment ago, you could have THC, the active ingredient, in your system, but that doesn't mean you're necessarily under the influence. Whereas with alcohol, they can test that level, and legally there's all sorts of precedent, all sorts of cases where they've established if you have a certain level, the state's level is this, you're legally impaired. But maybe you smoked it 2 or 3 days ago, you're perfectly clear-headed here, but it's in your system, right? That's one of the problems.
That's right. And the other challenge is marijuana is much more individualized than alcohol. If somebody is 0.08 of their blood level of alcohol, they're pretty drunk. Whereas in marijuana, there's not a uniform standard. In other words, a habitual user of marijuana could smoke a joint and not feel that out of it. And an innocent bystander, you pull them in, you give them the same amount, and they could be falling all over the place. So there's no universal standard as there is for alcohol.
Okay. Eric?
Is there any work to create a standard that law enforcement agencies could use in a courtroom?
Yes, there is. And that study is going on at UCSD, as a matter of fact. They have a Center for Cannabis Research, and they're doing a double-blind study where they get people to smoke a marijuana cigarette and then go into a driving simulator. And they give them a number of different scenarios. They have to merge onto a freeway, watch for pedestrians, so on and so forth. They get them really stoned, and then they have them do that. Then they wait a couple hours later. They test them again. They test their blood. They test their breath levels, you name it. And it's double blind so that some people are smoking a marijuana cigarette with THC. Some are smoking a marijuana cigarette without THC. So to remove any kind of bias at all, it's totally double
And even
blind.
the researchers don't know.
The researchers don't know either.
Yeah, so
it's really the first scientific study that's trying to establish a baseline.
Okay. And how much, as we said, all sorts of studies, analysis for many years, decades on driving drunk, how much research has been done to this point? Almost none, right, on marijuana?
Well, right, because marijuana is still illegal as far as the federal government's concerned, and they have been absolutely incredibly restrictive on what kind of research anybody can do with marijuana. And now that it's legal in certain states, like in California, there's a little bit more latitude. But no, there hasn't been a lot of research on it. And so these people are really launching a groundbreaking study.
And one of the interesting things I think about Prop 64 that we passed in California last November is some of the tax dollars that come from retail sales of marijuana are actually being funneled directly to some of these studies that are trying to determine a legal limit of intoxication from marijuana, and also the California Highway Patrol trying to figure out exactly how to determine whether someone's impaired.
Well, we do have a bite here I wanted to set up. Michael Seiss of Scripps here, and he says it's unsafe to drive after consuming any amount. Let's hear that.
Any kind of drugs or alcohol wipe out that ability to react quickly, to judge distances, and in fact make you a dangerous driver.
Now, other experts you interviewed said, well, no, there could be some low levels that would be okay. Can we expect a consensus at some point after the research? Or?
Well, I don't think there's anybody that would recommend that somebody smoke marijuana and then get into a car and drive. But the researcher I spoke to at UCSD said, based on past research, it doesn't appear that marijuana in and of itself confers an extra special risk for driving. But that doesn't mean that somebody should smoke a joint or what have you and get behind the wheel. So there's so many unknowns in the equation.
And what I remember hearing that story was he was saying basically what should count is whether or not someone's impaired. So you can have a certain amount of THC in your system, and if you're not impaired from driving, that should not be illegal. But again, it's so subjective to each individual person.
Well, and it's not illegal, by the way, to drive with alcohol in your system. It's only illegal to be legally
to a
drunk.
certain level.
So
right.
if you have one beer and you eat a big meal and you get behind a wheel, you're probably not legally drunk. That's okay. Are you impaired? Well, that's another matter.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right, we're just about out of time. We'll have to look forward to research and what it shows and follow-ups on that and see what the experience has been in other states and California as we move along. Well, that does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable, and I'd like to thank my guests, Andrew Bowen of KPBS News, Eric Anderson, also of KPBS, Ingrid Lobet of iNewsSource, our news partner, and Kenny Goldberg of KPBS News. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.